For me, this reminds me of when I was in the military, watching our adversaries like ISIS use social media incredibly effectively. Not necessarily a tool that you think of in the dual use space, but certainly one that has impact when it comes to geopolitics and to security. But for us at Shield, I think we really take a broad approach of what we mean by national security technologies.
Hi, Akhil. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. We've known each other for a little bit over a year and a half, and really excited today to share your journey with our listeners and a little bit about Shield Capital, which I've always thought is a really cool place. Could you start us off by introducing Shield and sharing a little bit about your journey into venture capital?
Yeah, absolutely, Emma. And thanks so much for having me on the podcast. Excited to talk a little bit more about Shield Capital and what we're doing. By way of background, originally from Buffalo, New York, did ROTC in college and spent 8 years in the Marines as an infantry and special operations officer. And I think like a lot of veterans saw some of the both opportunities and challenges on the battlefield and in the operating environment, where we saw some incredible technology and then some commercial technology that maybe wasn't being applied or used by our nation and our allies in the best way possible. And was fortunate to connect with the Shield Capital team before there was a fund when we were establishing it in 2020. And Shield Capital, we're an early stage venture fund. So Fund One focused on this nexus of technologies that impact both national security and the commercial enterprise. We're focused on 4 core areas: AI, autonomy, cybersecurity, and space, and think there's really a nexus actually between all 4 of those. And obviously with both customers and applications ranging from the business world to the world of government.
So you say that Shield also straddles things, the line between technologies that are used for military applications, but also commercial applications. Heard this referred to as kind of dual use technologies. Could you explain what that means and give some examples of such technologies?
Yeah, definitely, Emma. And I think maybe to start off at Shield have a specific approach to how we view technologies with that nexus between commercial and national security. I think the challenge with that term dual use, as you mentioned, it means a lot of things to a lot of people. It could be specific dual use applications, as you articulated, but it could also be just a certain type of technology that's sold both to 2 different customer sets. But it might also mean, on the latter point, is simply the impact that a certain type of technology has both to the government and to the private sector space. For me, this reminds me of when I was in the military, watching our adversaries like ISIS use social media incredibly effectively. Not necessarily a tool that you think of in the dual use space, but certainly one that has impact when it comes to geopolitics and to security. But for us at Shield, I think we really take a broad approach of what we mean by national security technologies that have applications both to government and commercial. And I think we really focus on that is how are you taking advantage of both sectors at the right time and place to amplify the success of your businesses and to build momentum. Now, I think the majority, for us at least, in this sort of space, straddling both the commercial and national security world, are technologies and companies that might be commercial first, but are looking to government as an expansion opportunity. But I think there's a couple forms of whatever we want to call dual use these days, that maybe bucketed into 3 categories. The first are companies that are starting commercial and have really built their bones in the commercial space, but are looking to government as that expansion opportunity, as I mentioned. Now, the examples that I think about, she goes back to my time in service to data miner, if you're familiar with it. So sort of data aggregation, ingestion, social media was actually one of the most incredible tools I used in the operating forces, because you could aggregate the insights of both our partners and allies and our adversaries, communicating their narrative and their campaigns to the entire world. They were a company that started commercial, but got an incredible contract from the Defense Innovation Unit in 2020 with over $48 million obligated at that time, and really expanded the commercial first business into the government sector. But I also think of other companies that are sort of software enterprise centric, like Databricks or Scale AI, right? That started predominantly in the commercial space, but recognizing that building the AI infrastructure within highly regulated industries like the government space, not just the Department of Defense, but the intelligence community and public sector writ large, just has incredible impact and can provide some serious revenue amplification to what they're doing. I'll quickly mention the other 2 because I think there are a couple different flavors of companies exploring both worlds. The second one, I think, are ones that are dynamically leveraging the advantages of both the government and the commercial space at the same time. And to be very clear, that's really hard. pursuing two markets at the same time. We totally understand that there's a need to focus. But I think there's a subset of companies in this space that if you're able to identify where the advantages you're getting from the both government and commercial sectors can be really powerful. And there's no better example of this than SpaceX. Recognizing that the government wanted a commercial capability to get things to space and built and saw that market signal to build something, but really now have blossomed into something where commercial contracts have really proliferated because we've lowered the launch costs, but that's on the back of the government. I think there are more examples, particularly in the autonomy and space sectors, where leveraging either the testing abilities or the early R&D efforts with the government can amplify the effects in the commercial space. Now, I'm not arguing that the majority of companies pursue that path, and I think there's probably a third category where we lean most heavily in, and that's really thinking about this ecosystem of dual use in the broadest sense possible. So it's how are you actually just providing important impact to both spaces. And the examples that I'll bring up here in this third category of ones that are maybe indirectly touching government are cybersecurity companies and those supporting the defense industrial base. So you think about companies like Recorded Future or companies dealing with privileged access management. So some sort of core IT security businesses that are purely pursuing the enterprise space, but that's incredibly important, right? Securing the businesses and the enterprises at scale from cyber attacks is just as impactful to the nation as companies selling directly to the government. I'd lump into that category too some advancements in companies doing additive manufacturing or software optimization for our defense industrial base, helping the current businesses that are selling to the government provide accelerated capabilities. And whether that's through a machine learning process to speed up the production of their manufacturing line, or if it's software that helps them move faster, I think that's just as important. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but I think the point I want to emphasize is just we think of that nexus between national security and commercial technology to be pretty broad in terms of the direct and indirect applications across both those sectors.
Thank you for that. I think that was a very important overview of what dual use may or may not mean, or at least means to shield capital. A lot of people just don't understand the breadth of stuff that the government needs and contracts for and how much overlap there is with the commercial sector. But if there is so much that the government needs and contracts for, why isn't every company partially a defense company or partially a public sector company? What is the government like as a customer? To step back a second and think about the market more broadly.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to shy away from government, whether that's continuing resolution, so uncertainty in the buyer, the fact that the buyer itself is far more disaggregated in the sense of multiple stakeholders, far more than potentially in the enterprise space, right? You're really dealing with three people here, three stakeholders: the person that actually uses the technology, the one who has the wallet, and the one who can actually write the contract. And being able to match all three of those up is incredibly challenging, requires a team and expertise to understand who those individuals and stakeholders are, to be able to project in the future where the government is looking to set priorities, and not just set priorities in terms of policy, but set priorities when it comes to the budget, which ultimately is your strategy, where you're willing to put the money. And then finally, be willing to have some resilience when it comes to the ebbs and flows that naturally happen within a government sales cycle. But I think the environment's also changed significantly, am I right, in the past 10 years or so. You see a lot of innovation happening in terms of both the technology and then the willingness among the Defense Department and the government to do things a little bit differently. The government set up in an acquisitions process really well to buy an aircraft carrier, but maybe not necessarily as much to buy software or software-centric capabilities. But you see that changing. Obviously, the creation of the Defense Innovation Unit by Secretary Ash Carter nearly 10 years ago is one example, but also the willingness to spend some more money when it comes to, or allocate a little bit more money when it comes to these novel capabilities, or at least commercially oriented capabilities that are having increasing impact in the national security domain. And the last thing I'll mention, the government, the good thing about them is they're a big customer. And you have an awesome opportunity to create a moat, because once you're in with some government opportunities, they tend to be sticky, and you can potentially unlock a set of new opportunities, particularly, again, as you see the convergence of some of the technologies in the investment domains we look at, AI space, cyber autonomy, that are having more and more relevance to the government. And the government wants to find more opportunities to partner with those who have already demonstrated success in the commercial space.
I know the answer to this, but for the sake of our listeners, what is it about these new innovation centers or groups like the Defense Innovation Unit, DIU, that are doing something differently? What is the change that you are seeing in more concrete terms?
Yeah, I think if I put it one or maybe two words, it would be market signal. What the Defense Innovation Unit, you throw in InQtel as the sort of additional informal venture arm, are really doing is providing a signal saying we have contract opportunities in which the commercial technologies have a home, and not just a research project or a science project, but real production contracts. And we want you to be a part of it. And that's a signal to the best entrepreneurs. That's a signal to us as venture capitalists to recognize that, hey, there's a real opportunity here and to be able to bring more into the fold. Obviously, there's a balance, right? There's still a lot of things the Department of Defense and government need to do when it comes to your traditional industrial base. And obviously, the conflict in Ukraine is highlighting that and the fragility of some of our defense industrial base. But I think it all fits together in terms of a combination of new age commercial capabilities, which I will argue are not necessarily new. The use of drones, the use of social media to create asymmetric impacts on the battlefield has gone on for years before. Certainly things that many of us as veterans saw in the campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan, particularly seeing how ISIS was so effective at using commercial drones and using social media. But you see that now on an industrialized scale when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine.
Are you seeing, given the government is becoming, say, a more attractive customer, more VC investment going into the sector?
Yeah, definitely, Emma. I think if I remember correctly, in 2023, there was over 30 billion in sort of defense-related technologies, and more before. That's certainly a significant increase since 5 years ago. But I'd say it's not just the government's becoming a better buyer. There's obviously still challenges to go there in terms of them becoming one, but it's certainly trending in the right direction. But obviously, the geopolitical situation adds to that, as well as, again, the impact of some of these technologies when it comes to the government space. But overall, trending positively in terms of the opportunity and investment dollars going into this space.
So this might be a bit of a broad question, but how do you view VC's relationship with the government? How do you see VCs in shaping the future of global competition?
My immediate thought, Emma, is it's not about us. It's not about the venture firms. We're following the market signals and the geopolitical signals. And it's probably most important to put the entrepreneurs and the end customer being the operators at the center of that picture, and us as supporters. And I think what we can do is be an advocate for the types of opportunities that commercial companies can provide in the government space and be champions for them to help them navigate the complexities when it comes to that trilemma of buyer, wallet, and credit card, and be able to help probably critically navigate where not to waste time and where you can find champions both within government and potentially among the team. And obviously, I think that the one thing I would like to think we can additionally provide is just a voice among what I would argue is a new generation of engineers and founders that really do care about mission-oriented technologies and businesses that are going to do both well and do good for the nation and its allies.
Are there any other key differences you think that we've not talked about between VCs investing in this space and VCs investing in like consumer spaces? I'm just curious, since you're trying to invest in companies that are serving one customer, whereas most companies are trying to capture 1 million customers. This is just one big customer. Is there any other core differences that people should know about?
Yeah, what I would first say is the government or the companies that we underwrite are not just selling to one customer. Even the government is a series of dozens, if not more, different customers with different needs and interests and budgets and priorities. And I think to your question, the thing that we were trying to build at Shield Capital was really a team and the expertise to help our portfolio companies navigate the intricacies of the government space, have a team that understands the contracting landscape, understands how these technologies are being applied, where the commercial innovations are happening, and have the capital, the resourcing, the network behind it to help them along.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, or at least I used to as well, thought of the government as a monolith but it really is a set of diverse customers that don't actually always talk to each other, unfortunately. But thinking of Shield Capital specifically and the investments that your team makes, could you just outline what you look for when evaluating potential investments?
Yeah, definitely. I think probably like many other investors, we focus first and foremost on the team. Do you have the right set of co-founders that are top of their game when it comes to the technologies, but also understand or at least have an exposure and appreciation for the intricacies and challenging to selling to the ideal customer profile that you are looking to target? Obviously, we look at some other aspects too beyond the team, but it's all centered around the team, what the market opportunity is for that particular technology or that particular approach. Obviously, the underlying technology itself, and then the strategy when it comes to either pursuing a commercial or government opportunity. Obviously, with that latter one, always know that strategy is going to change, particularly at the stage we invest in, which is early stage, leading seed and Series A deals. But I think what's most important about the discussions about strategy is just to see how the team is thinking about where some of their first opportunities might be, when would be the time to deviate from the plan, and how they can use and leverage their network, including a potential investment partner like us, to help them succeed in their first set of sales and for them going forward.
So you said earlier that it's difficult to go after both a commercial customer and a public sector customer. Are you looking at companies that are trying to do both at the same time from the get-go, or do you look at customers that could potentially go the public sector route down the road but aren't at the moment? How do you consider that?
Yeah, definitely, Emma. I think the majority of our companies err towards that latter part of your question, which is commercial first with government opportunities going forward. The exception, I think, as I mentioned earlier, are potentially companies in the space and autonomy sectors where the government is an important early partner when it comes to either the testing and validation of your technology and the acceleration that can provide, or some early funding when it comes to deploying a capability. If you want to build and deploy an autonomous vehicle or a space asset, it's really hard not to engage the government early because how important the government is as a customer and important is as a regulator. But I think, Emma, to the first set of questions, I think the key here is really around, does the strategy make sense when it comes to the level of focus needed for what type of customer? And again, really focusing on when do you need to take advantage of each sector to help amplify and build momentum for your respective business, understanding the intricacies and sort of idiosyncrasies of the specific space you're working in.
So it's a very case-by-case basis.
I would say so. But if you look at I would argue most of the AI companies, the companies I mentioned earlier, Databricks, Scale AI, these are companies that started mostly commercial first, but now have some incredible opportunities when it comes to helping the chief digital and AI office in the Department of Defense, for example, help build out the AI infrastructure there. And we've got other companies in our portfolio, Unstructured being one of them, right? That's early stage, helping transition unstructured text and other types of files into the AI ingestion pipeline for structured workloads. They do have still opportunities because the applications are so similar across any type of industry. You have legacy PDF, investment reports, Intel reports that need to get transferred into a large language model that is a pretty similar challenge, whether you're working in the federal government or at a financial service firm.
And for our listeners, we had the field CTO of Scale AI on in a recent episode where we talked about some of this. So if you're listening and curious, give it a listen. But back to Shield. So you said also that leadership, the team, is what you think of as most important. I'd love to hear about how you evaluated that in the context of recent investment.
Yeah, definitely. I'll give one just because they're notable. I know, Emma, you had a couple of space companies on your podcast recently. So we're co-investors and co-led around into Apex Space. This is Ian Cinnamon out of Los Angeles working on modular packages, payloads, satellite buses to really reduce the burden and challenges of deploying payloads to space. We've reduced the launch costs of getting things to space. And now it's about being able to provide modular packages to deploy your specific type of capability within the environment. And Ian was able to build an incredible team and had a real big vision for what it meant to build the future of the space economy. And I think aligns with many of the trends that we just talked about around finding opportunities in the commercial space who wanted an outsourced capability to build their package, their satellite bus, but also recognizing the national security enterprise, not just of the US Department of Defense, but internationally, want more cheaper, faster deployed capabilities to space. And that fits within both narratives and our opportunities that are reflective both in the commercial space to get capabilities up there, as well as within the national security domain.
For something as complicated as space, what made you think that Apex really could do it?
Yeah, I think, Emma, to the question you're asking, it comes down to the team for a lot of these. It's the focus of mission, the recognition that speed to effort and getting capabilities deployed in the timeline that they did. They had their first successful launch last month with some initial capabilities. Really comes down to that understanding, back to the points I was mentioning earlier around a team that is technically adept at the space that they're working in, understands the intricacies of the customer set that they are working towards, knows what types of partners that they want, either advisors, venture partners, or others, or internal team members that can help deliver on those capabilities and a unifying mission. The same leadership aspects that many of us in the military saw, but storming, norming, and forming a new team to deliver impact and to perform regardless of what they're doing.
Awesome. So to switch gears a tiny bit, I would love to just hear a little bit about the technologies that you personally are really excited about in the next 1 to 5 years.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'll start with how Starlink is going to transform how we compute and connect across the world. And I think that's going to unlock some incredible technological opportunities when it comes to edge or distributed computation and sensing. That's obviously a huge important aspect when it comes to the national security domain of being able to sense and make sense of the environment in a distributed and disaggregated way, one in which the latency is low, but the resiliency is high. And I think with that comes too the need and requirement to secure all that, to be able to digitally secure a distributed ecosystem with a variety of sensors and systems that are all connected together and do so in a way that is not too high of a resource cost, but provides the trust needed for a variety of customers, not just the government and Department of Defense, but your manufacturing base and other highly regulated industries that rely on a set of new computing capabilities, want to leverage AI, but want to ensure that the trust, verifiability, and credibility behind it are also there.
A lot of our listeners are interested in VC and technologies like the ones you just mentioned. How do you go about turning that into an actionable investment thesis and plan for Shield?
Yeah, definitely, Emma. I think it's a little bit of top down and bottom up, as they say, a little bit investment thesis driven, understanding that there's some specific spaces, some of which I just mentioned, that we're particularly excited about because we see the opportunity when it comes to both the commercial sector and the government space. We see that technology maturing, but obviously recognizing that we don't see everything and there's opportunities coming from entrepreneurs who are experiencing these problem sets firsthand that come up with incredible ideas and technologies that will have an impact in the four sectors that we invest in. When it comes to actually making that decision, I might go back to the sort of four areas we were talking about before. That's the team, the market, the technology, and the sort of initial strategy. But really, again, all centered around the team, their unique insights into the domain that they are pursuing and will pursue for the foreseeable future, and be able to make a connection with them. And recognize, too, that we at Shield, again, as a lead investor, really want to be there supporting our incredible entrepreneurs as they navigate both the challenges and complexities of the technologies and the customer sets.
For those of our listeners interested in a venture capital career and thinking about ones that might be interested in a specialized field like this, what sort of skills and experiences do you think are essential?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, I came from a military background, but by no means do I think that's a necessary requirement. In fact, the newest member of our investment team, she's awesome, does not come from a military background, but is just incredibly intellectually curious about the applications of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity tools across the landscape, whether that's in the commercial space or in the government space. But I think to that point, the aspects that resonated with me, I guess, when I was looking at a potential career in the venture space, again, yeah, it comes down to the technologies are just really cool. Getting the chance to go see our company, Akhil Iyer, fly a autonomous platform, or watching Apex launch their first satellite to orbit, or seeing the tangible applications of some of our companies preventing cybersecurity attacks or accelerating the ability of the defense industrial base to build and to provide the next generation of parts and platforms. I mean, that's the part that's exciting. It's, I guess, less of a finance job, if you will, and more of a job in which the intellectual curiosity, both for the technology sets and the incredible entrepreneurs, really comes to the forefront, and the willingness and the appreciation for the challenges that comes with that.
How do you show intellectual curiosity in a subject like this for those trying to get into VC?
Yeah, maybe I'll just share from experience. When I left the military, I had an awesome opportunity to do an academic project at the Defense Innovation Unit, actually, when I was in grad school, looking at what were the challenges with deploying small drones at scale within the U.S. Department of Defense and to our government entities. And that for me was a great way to get reasonably deep when it came to the types of technologies, interdependencies, markets, and challenges when it came to deploying a vast fleet of small drones. And that was sort of my first foray. So I guess to answer your question, it's, I think, getting a little deep in maybe one or two spaces that you find really interesting, getting a chance to talk with everyone and anyone in that industry who has some particular perspective, because there's nothing better, as we all know, than talking with the end users, the folks actually using some of these technologies or having to deal with the pains of deploying some of these technologies, and then staying current when it comes to what the newest technologies are within the space or the new approaches, and then probably equally making the connections between, especially in the spaces that we invest in, right, Emma, ones that straddle both the commercial and national security world, is recognizing where maybe there's some commercial innovations happening that haven't yet made the leap or connection to some of the national security opportunities. I mean, this was certainly an experience for me with one of our portfolio companies that was working on software optimization for edge devices, not necessarily a business that was focused in the national security space, but we certainly recognize that if you can reduce the memory power runtime of machine learning algorithms working on a variety of edge devices, that was just as important to folks in national security and to government as it was to a variety of enterprise customers looking to reduce the resource costs of the types of software they were running on their own devices.
Thank you for that. I know a lot of my fellow MBAs struggled at the beginning. They were excited about something, but didn't know how to show that they were excited. It's a show, don't tell exercise. On the flip side, if you were advising a startup that had a technology applicable to government use, but hasn't explored that avenue, what sort of advice might you give them?
I think the first thing I would say is just really map out and understand who is going to be your champion within the government space. Just because a technology might seem like it has a national security application does not necessarily mean that there is a champion when it comes to both the user, the budget, and who's going to write the contract. But then B, is it a priority amongst the government? Is this something that we as a venture firm can underwrite because we believe this is going to be not just a niche application, but something that can be proliferated across the government space? I think with that comes, whether that's team internal, so you have individuals within your team to really navigate and know which stakeholders within government are and are not the most likely prospects to be a champion, or find the partnerships, whether that's at a venture firm or with others, to help you assess that. So I think there's a good amount of thinking that goes up front to really recognize who within government, as you were mentioning before, the government's not just one stakeholder, it's a distributed set of them with potentially differing priorities or different levels of priority that one has to navigate.
I have two final questions. The first is, for either situation, whether you're trying to break into the space as an entrepreneur or an investor, do you have to have a defense background of any sort to get into this?
Yeah, I don't think so, Emma. I think particularly in this day and age where so many of the commercial innovations are having relevance to national security, I think it's actually great. And I think that's the benefit of this ecosystem and where the opportunities in national security are today. Is I love the fact that there are more and more individuals, entrepreneurs, engineers that are coming from sort of traditional business backgrounds that want to get involved for a combination of the mission, because you can really do make a pretty important impact, but also because the opportunities from a business standpoint are there. But I think it goes back to understanding and recognizing where some of the technologies or applications or innovations happening in the commercial space can and have applicability to other domains.
To end this episode, do you have any big bets or any interesting forecasts about how the future of dual use investments or dual use tech developments or just something government related over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, definitely, Emma. That's definitely a broad question. What I will say first is that immediately when you say 5 to 10 years, I think about where we are going to be geopolitically when it comes to the geopolitical competition that we're currently underway between the US and the People's Republic of China, or where the conflict in Ukraine will head out. But I think to that point, when it comes to technology, then there are two trends that I'm at least looking out for. The first is really, will we see a bifurcation between the sort of techno democracy? So, how technologies are applied when it comes to artificial intelligence within the democratic world, and those technologies that are espoused in a different way, that within the Communist Chinese Party or elsewhere. The second one I'll look at is really there's a growing need to deploy and develop these capabilities faster. The trend that I'm maybe looking for is how quickly as a nation can we deploy these. I'm always reminded by the book, for those, many of you probably read it, Arsenal of Democracy. So how were we, before World War II started, really able to mobilize our entire nation to prepare for war? And obviously none of us want to go into war. We want to be able to mobilize the nation to help deter conflict. But that's certainly something that's going to be top of mind over the next 5 years, definitely. And I think a lot of these capabilities across the board, not just new novel commercial capabilities, so your drones, the ability to leverage artificial intelligence across our sensing, make sense, and actions. And a lot of that's not necessarily just, I think, to put a finer point on, Emma, a lot of those aren't necessarily in sort of really high-tech areas. These are the unsexy aspects of optimizing resilience, logistics, and supply chain. Being able to produce equipment faster on edge or at the frontier to deliver more capabilities, whether that's drones or other types of platforms faster. Or three, to be able to stitch things together, to be able to actually, again, back to the statement of sensing and making sense of the environment using all the different data feeds that we have, imagery, social media, multimodal, and really put that together. I think we'll see a lot of those come to a head, or at least come to real tangible applications, if not already, over the next 5 years.
Thank you for that. I think that kind of sums up well a lot of what we've talked about, where tried to highlight in this episode. The government's not a monolith. It contracts for everything, and we don't know necessarily what technology will be applicable in 5 to 10 years. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, Emma. It's great to chat for a bit, and look forward to hearing a couple more of these podcasts going forward.